Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. And I'm meeting you once again with lecture 31 of Drama 2, that is modern drama. In today's lecture, that is a continuation of overviews of lecture, the third lecture of the continuity, we are going to talk about Beckett's theatre. And when we will talk about Beckett's theatre, definitely we are going to review our understanding of the drama Waiting for Godot. Beckett's theatre is stark, fundamentally minimalist and deeply pessimistic about human nature and the human situation. So you will find this drama comparatively different from all the other dramas that you have read so far in modern drama. And this can be comparatively taken as a kind of more challenging drama as far as the understanding of this drama is concerned. So I thought this is very important to give this drama due time as far as your revision is concerned. So let's talk about the themes in Waiting for Godot, and we will talk about all the important aspects one by one. So themes in the play include mirroring own search for freedom, revolving around a young man's efforts to cut himself loose from his family and social obligations. Life means waiting, killing time and clinging to the hope that relief may be just around the corner. Trades in plot, characterization and final solution, which had hitherto been the hallmarks of drama for a series of concrete stage images. These were just the highlights of the play. So the language used in Theatre of Absurd is definitely different type of language that you would read in other dramas of all the times and specifically of modern times. Language used in Theatre of Absurd is useless, in fact. For the writer creates a mythical universe peopled by lonely creatures who struggle vainly to express the unexpressible. Characters exist in a terrible dream-like vacuum, overcome by an overwhelming sense of bewilderment and grief. Grotesquely attempting some form of communication, then crawling on endlessly. So it's a vicious circle that is going on and on and on. There is no beginning, there is no end. So let's talk about absurdist drama in some detail now to refresh your understanding of this concept. Waiting for Godot is a two-act stage drama classified as a tragic comedy. In 1965, critic Martin Eslin coined the term theatre of the absurd to describe Godot and other plays like it. As a result, these plays also become known as absurdist theatre. A group of dramatists in the 1940s in Paris believed life is without apparent meaning or purpose. It is, in short, absurd, as French playwright and novelist Albert Camus wrote in a 1942 essay, The Myth of Sisyphus. Paradoxically, the only certainty in life is uncertainty. The absurdist believed. An absurdist drama is a play that depicts life as meaningless, senseless, uncertain. For example, an absurdist story generally ends up where it started. Nothing has been accomplished and nothing gained. The characters may be uncertain of time and place, and they are virtually the same at the end of the play as they were at the beginning. No change. So, as far as dialogue, language, humor of absurdist drama is concerned, the language in an absurdist drama often goes nowhere. Characters misunderstand or misinterpret one another very frequently, and frequently responding to a statement or a question with a non-sequitur or a ludicrous comment. The dialogue sometimes resembles the give and take of the classic Abbott and Costello vaudeville routine in which the two comedians are discussing a baseball game. A player named who is on first base. Abbott does not know the name of the player, so he asks Costello, who's on first? The absurdity of the dialogue is the author's way of calling attention to the seeming absurdity of life. For Samuel Beckett, the world wobbles on its axis, and the people who inhabit it do not always think logically or talk sensibly. And whatever I'm discussing in reference with Beckett's philosophy, basically it describes about his idea of absurdist drama. So, the plot and structure of absurdist drama. The structure of a typical absurdist drama is like a spaceship orbiting Earth or a Ferris wheel revolving on an axle. The spaceship and the Ferris wheel endlessly repeat their paths. If only the passengers on the spaceship and the Ferris wheel could break free and fly off on their own, but they cannot. They are tethered to forces beyond their control. The same is true of Vladimir and Estragon in Waiting for Godot. They wait for Godot at the beginning of the play, wait for Godot in the middle of the play, and keep on waiting at the end of the play. Godot never comes. So, Vladimir and Estragon continue to revolve, but never evolve. They are caught in the absurdity of continuously moving but never progressing. So, what is the social acceptance of absurdist theatre, and specifically Waiting for Godot as a drama, a modern drama? Waiting for Godot qualifies as one of Samuel Beckett's most famous works. Originally written in French in 1948, Beckett personally translated the play into English, and that attaches a lot of significance with the play. The world premiere was held on January 5, 1953 in the Left Bank Theatre of Babylon in Paris. The play's reputation spread slowly through word of mouth, and it soon became quite famous. Other productions around the world rapidly followed. The play initially failed in the United States, likely as a result of being misbilled as Love of Four Continents. A subsequent production in New York City was more carefully advertised and generated some success. So, let me give you a very quick overview of the plot of the drama. Act 1, Vladimir and Estragon are near a tree to wait for Godot. That's how the drama starts. Pozzo and Lucky enter. These are two characters. Vladimir and Estragon is one pair, and Pozzo and Lucky is the other pair. Pozzo talks with Vladimir and Estragon, Lucky dancing and thinking, making them happy. After Pozzo and Lucky leave, a boy tells Vladimir and Godot will not come that evening. So boy is the fifth character. Vladimir and Estragon decide to leave, but they do not move as the curtain falls, and Act 1 stops here. It finishes, and Act 2 starts. The next day, Vladimir and Estragon again near the tree to wait for Godot. Pozzo and Lucky enter again, but Pozzo is blind and Lucky is dumb. Pozzo does not remember meeting the two men before ever. After they leave, Vladimir and Estragon continue to wait. And then the boy enters. He tells Vladimir that Godot will not come. He insists that he did not speak to Vladimir yesterday. After he leaves, Vladimir and Estragon decide to leave, but they do not move again, ending the play. So, this is how this two-act play ends, starting with something and ending with the very same idea and same movement. This can also be understood as dark and bleak comedy, which refers to fictional works that blend aspects of genres of tragedy as well as comedy. In English literature from Shakespeare's time to the 19th century, tragicomedy refers to a serious play with a happy ending. However, dark comedy may end up with a static plot. There isn't any improvement, any development in plot. So this is the difference between tragicomedy and black comedy or dark comedy. So, a question often comes up, who or what is Godot? And Beckett says, if I knew, I would have said so in the play. So, the uncertainties and irreducible ambiguities are an essential element of its total impact. What's total impact? Absurdist drama's total impact. In Waiting for Godot, the feeling of uncertainty it produces, the ebb and flow of this uncertainty from the hope of discovering the identity of Godot to its repeated disappointment are themselves the essence of the play. So Beckett's play lack plot even more completely than other works of the theatre of the absurd. Instead of linear development or linear development presented as Beckett's institution of the human condition by a method that is essentially polyphonic. So, Waiting for Godot does not tell a story, it explores a static situation. The sequence of events and the dialogue in each act are different. They encounter Pozzo and Lucky under different circumstances. They attempt suicide and fail for different reasons. The boy arrives but does not recognize our protagonist and tells them Mr. Godot cannot come. Variations merely serve to emphasize the essential sameness of the situation. Beckett often focused on the idea of the suffering of being. Most of the play deals with the fact that Estragon and Vladimir are waiting for something to elevate their boredom. Godot can be understood as one of the many things in life that people wait for. The play has often been viewed as fundamentally existentialist in its take on life. So, if we analyze the plot, there are a few things that we need to recall. The fact that none of the characters retain a clear mental history means that they are constantly struggling to prove their existence. They have no memory left. They never knew if they ever existed. Waiting for Godot is part of the theatre of the absurd. This implies that it is meant to be irrational. Absurd theatre does away with the concepts of drama, chronological plot, logical language, themes, and recognizable settings. You will not find any of these things here. There is also a split between the intellect and the body within the work, and this is symbolized by both of the pairs, Pozzo and Lucky as well as Estragon and Vladimir. Thus Vladimir represents the intellect and Estragon the body, both of whom cannot exist without the other. So, if we analytically analyze the settings and structure, the play has a circular structure. It ends almost exactly it begins with. The two acts are symmetrically built. The stage is divided into two halves by a tree. The human races into two, Vladimir and Estragon. It is pervaded by a grotesque humor. Its tone is tragic and desperate. So, if we quickly go through the themes of the play in Waiting for Godot, we can come up with several themes. So, theme of choice. Waiting for Godot consists of two men unable to act, move, or think in any significant way, while they kill time waiting for a mysterious man, Godot. The characters fail to realize that this very act of waiting is a chaos, or is also a choice, Instead, they view it as a mandatory part of their daily routine. Even when these men manage to make a conscious decision, they can't translate that mental choice into a physical activity. They often decide to leave the stage only to find that they are unable to move. Many of the time with some invisible restrictions, however, sometimes with some visible restrictions. Such inaction leads to stagnancy and repetition in the seemingly endless cycle of their lives. What is the barrier between the decision to act and action itself in waiting for Godot? And why are the men unable to move after they have decided to do so is very important question based on the theme of the choice. So, if Vladimir and Estragon realized they had the freedom of choice, they could break their daily cycle of habit and inaction. The problem is one of consciousness, in fact. So, Waiting for Godot is hailed as a classic example of theatre of the absurd, dramatic works that promote the philosophy of its nature. So, we are now discussing the theme of philosophical viewpoint, the theme of absurdity. This particular play presents a world in which daily actions are without meaning. Language fails to effectively communicate, and the characters at times reflect a sense of artifice, even wondering about whether perhaps they are on a stage. So, moving on with the questions about philosophical viewpoint, one or two questions that I would like to bring into your notice to prepare for your final assessments. Vladimir and Estragon's situation is so absurd that it doesn't resemble any reality we are familiar with. How is it possible then that the play can comment on our own lives? Does Beckett suggest a level of absurdity in the real world? Or do Estragon and Vladimir recognize that their actions are absurd? Or does everything seem normal to them? So, these questions may need your reflection if you understood the philosophy of absurdity in this drama. So, the Waiting for Godot is also significant for the theme of truth embedded in it. In Waiting for Godot, this play is driven by a lack of truth, in other words, uncertainty. Characters are unable to act in any meaningful way and claim this is so because they are uncertain of the consequences. Without the presence of objective truth, every statement is brought to question, and these questions are never answered. And even common labels, color, time, names, everything becomes arbitrary, subjective, and meaningless. Another theme that can be very important to discuss in relevance with Waiting for Godot is theme of life, consciousness, as well as existence. The portrait of daily life painted by Waiting for Godot, in fact painted by Beckett in Waiting for Godot, is dismissal 1. It is repetitive and stagnant. It lacks meaning and purpose and entails perpetual suffering. In fact, the solution which none of the characters take would seem to be action and choice despite the ever-presence of uncertainty and an awareness of one's surrounding and past actions. As one character says, habit is a great deadener. Our actions should stem from conscious choice rather than apathy. So, let's talk about the theme of time in Waiting for Godot, where time presents a slew of problems in Waiting for Godot. The very title of the play reveals its central action, that is, waiting, keep on waiting. The two main characters are forced to whittle away with days while anticipating the arrival of a man who never comes. Because they have nothing to do in the meanwhile, in the meantime, time is a dreaded barrier, a test of their ability to endure, because they repeat the same actions every day. Time is cyclic, time is meaningless. That every character seems to have a faulty memory further complicates matters. Time loses meaning when the actions of one day have no relevance whatsoever with certainty or on the text. And about the theme of religion, it is incompatible with reason in Waiting for Godot. Characters who attempt to understand religion logically are left in the dark, and the system is compared to such absurd banalities as switching bowler hats or taking a boot on and off activity. So religion is also tied to uncertainty, since there is no way of knowing what is objectively true in the realm of faith and what exists and what does not. We also find a theme of friendship in the play that is tricky in Waiting for Godot, because each character is fundamentally isolated from every other, and however still at the same time they are depending on each other. Relationships teeter between a fear of loneliness and an essential inability to connect. This tension is central to the play and very much observable and vivid. The problems that keep characters apart vary from physical disgust to ego to a fear of others' suffering. And then the theme of freedom and confinement. Every character in Waiting for Godot seems to live in a prison of his own making. Each is confined to a state of passivity and stagnancy by his own ability to act. The one character who is basically or literally the slave of another is no more restricted than those who are technically free. In fact, he may be more free because he is at least aware of his imprisonment. That is very beautifully projected by Beckett in this play. So, the theme of suffering is a constant and I would say fundamental part of human existence, described beautifully and in length by Beckett in Waiting for Godot. Every character suffers, and suffers always, in an ongoing vicious circle with no seeming respite in sight. The hardship ranges from the physical to the mental, the minor to the extreme. It derives some men to find companionship so as to weather the storm together, causes others to abuse their companions, to lessen the suffering of the self, and for still others lead to self-isolation, since watching people suffer is a kind of anguish on its own. And theme of mortality, another important aspect to discuss. None of the characters in Waiting for Godot shy away from the fact that death is inevitable. In fact, death becomes at times a solution for the inactivity of daily life, and that shows the pessimism in Beckett's philosophy of absurdity. The main characters contemplate suicide as though it were as harmless as walking to the grocery store, probably because there is nothing in their life worth sticking around for anyway. They ultimately, in fact, all the characters ultimately do not commit suicide because they claim not to have the means, not to have resources, but also because they are uncertain of the result of their attempt. What if it may not work? What if they fail? So the fear of failure, in fact, prevents any of the characters from all of the actions, because they can't be sure of what their action will bring. They decide on no action altogether. And questions about mortality, some questions that I would like to bring into your notice. Why do Estragon and Vladimir want to kill themselves? And why don't they kill themselves? And if death is inevitable and ever impending, as Pozo points out, how do we live our lives with any sense of purpose? Does Waiting for Godot propose a solution to this problem? And if you would have been able to put down your reflection on this question, that means that you have clearly understood the concept of absurdity in the play. Now, theme of hope, another very important theme, because the entire play revolves around the theme of hope. Vladimir and Estragon are lowly bums. Their only material possessions, besides their tattered clothes, are a turnip and a carrot. Nevertheless, they have not given up on life. They do not descend into depression. Pessimism and cynicism, even though they frequently exchange insults, they enjoy each other's company and help each other as well. Above all, though, they wait. They wait for Godot. They do not know who he is or where he comes from, but they wait just the same, apparently, because he represents hope in the play and in their lives. And then this theme of hope links to another theme, that is search for meaning, search for life, search for truth. Vladimir and Estragon are homeless rovers attempting to find an answer to a question all human beings face. What is the meaning of life? Godot may have the answer for them. So they are waiting and they keep on waiting. After Godot fails to appear on the first day, they return to the tree the next day to continue waiting, and he does not come. In fact, he never comes. Vladimir and Estragon decide to leave the area. However, the stage directions at the end of the play says they do not move at all. They do not move an inch. Apparently, they play to continue their search for meaning by continue to wait for Godot, that is, wait for nothing. And then this links the idea with the theme of dependency, how dependent we are, how dependent they are. Vladimir and Estragon dependent on each other to survive. Although they exchange insults from time to time, it is clear that they value each other's company very much. One could imagine Pozzo without Lucky until the second act, when the audience learns he has gone blind. Unable to find his way, Pozzo is totally dependent on Lucky. Lucky, of course, is tied to Pozzo by a rope and by fear of being abandoned. And here we come to understand the theme of monotony, the vicious circle of life that starts with something and ending on the same very thing as well. Life is tedious and repetitive for Vladimir and Estragon. In the first act of the play, in fact, they meet at a tree to wait for Godot. In the second act, they meet at the same tree to wait for Godot. Irish critic Vivian Merker once wrote in a review of the play, "Nothing happens twice." And this makes us to understand the theatre of the absurd in detail. Of all the English language modernists, Beckett's work represents the most sustained attack on the realist tradition. So all the philosophy that has been coded into different themes in Beckett's drama Waiting for Godot is primarily discussing and describing Beckett's idea of absurdity in life and Beckett's association with the theatre of absurd. He, more than anyone else, opened up the possibility of drama and fiction that dispense with conventional plot and the unities of place and time in order to focus on essential components of the human condition. Writers like Havel, John Benneville, Aidan Higgins, and Harold Pinter have publicly stated their indebtedness to Beckett's example, but he has had a much wider influence on experimental writing since the 1950s, from the Beat generation to the happenings of the 1960s and beyond. So let's analyze the drama with its philosophical background for Waiting for Godot, and we are analyzing it having three aspects in our vision. We will discuss it. We will discuss the effects of World War II, where 62 million people killed, 12 million in concentration camps, an atomic bomb, and the promise of annihilation for all the coming generations. So this was the background of Beckett's pessimism that he reveals in the play and in its theatre of absurd. The philosophical background can further be divided into three categories: theatre of the absurd, existentialism, and the paradox of consciousness. The theatre of the absurd can be understood form and content merged to form a a truer art. However, the existentialism can be understood as no exit by sautre, absurd content, but rational form or presentation. Let's discuss these ideas and philosophies in bit detail, or refresh your memories about them. So the term theatre of the absurd was coined by Martin Esslin in a book of the same name, Beckett and Godot, were contrepieces of the book. Esslin claimed these plays were the fulfillment of Albert Campbell's concept of the absurd. This is one reason Beckett is often falsely labeled as an existentialist. Though many of the themes are similar, Beckett had little affinity for existentialism as a whole. You might have seen all the themes that described just recently, and when we were having the discussion based on the lectures, all of these themes are closely linked to each other, and basically one is giving way to the other. Broadly speaking, the plays deal with the subject of despair and the will to survive in spite of that despair, in the face of an uncomprehending and indeed incomprehensible world. So the words of Neil, one of the two characters in Endgame who are trapped in ash bins from which they occasionally peek their heads to speak, can best summarize the theme of the plays of Beckett's middle period. And these words says that, and we laugh with a will in the beginning, but it's always the same thing. Yes, it's like the funny story we have heard too often. We still find it funny, but we don't laugh anymore. Nothing is funnier than unhappiness. That is what describes the very philosophy of theatre of absurd. The very basic term of absurd derives from the philosophical use of the word absurd by such existentialist thinkers as Albert Camus. And Camus particularly argued that humanity had to resign itself to recognize that a fully satisfying rational explanation of the universe was beyond its reach. In that sense, the world must ultimately be seen as absurd. So the playwrights, loosely grouped under the label of the absurd, endeavor to convey their sense of bewilderment, anxiety, and wonder in the face of an inexplicable universe. They rely heavily on poetic metaphors as to convey means of projecting outward their innermost state of mind. Hence, the images of the theatre of the absurd tend to assume the quality of fantasy, dream, and nightmare. They do not so much portray the outward appearance of reality as the playwright's emotional perception of inner reality. Thus, Beckett's Happy Days expresses a generalized human anxiety about the approach of death through the concrete image of a woman's sunk waist, deep in the ground in the first act and neck deep in the second. The Isonic demonstrate the playwright's anxiety about the spread of inhuman totalitarian tendency in society by showing the population of a city turning into savage psychodrums. So, one of the most important aspects of absurd drama was its distrust of language as a means of communication. This aspect we discussed in detail when we were discussing having our lectures on the theatre of absurd, primarily about Waiting for Godot. So language had become a vehicle of conventionalized, stereotype, meaningless, limited exchange of words that does not exchange the real ideas. Words fail to express the essence of human experience, not being able to penetrate beyond its surface. The theatre of the absurd continued first and foremost an onslaught on language, showing it is a very limited, unreliable, and insufficient tool of communication. Absurd drama uses conventionalized speech, cliches, slogans, and technical jargons which is distorts, parodies and breakdowns. By ridiculing conventionalized and stereotyped speech patterns, the theatre of the absurd tries to make people aware of the possibility of going beyond everyday speech conventions and communicating more authentically. Conventionalized speech acts as a barrier between ourselves and what the world is really about. In order to come into direct contact with natural reality, it is necessary to discredit and discard the false crutches of unconventionalized or conventionalized language patterns. So, objects are much more important than language in absurd theatre. What happens transcends what is being said about it. It is the hidden, implied meaning of words that assume primary importance in absurd theatre, over and above what is being actually said. The theatre of the absurd strove to communicate an undissolved totality of perception. Hence, it had to go beyond language, a medium beyond language, beyond words. So, absurd drama subverts logic. It relishes the unexpected, the logically impossible. In trying to burst the bonds of logic and language, the absurd theatre is trying to shatter the enclosing walls of the human condition itself. Our individual identity is defined by language. Having a name is source of our separateness. The loss of logical language bring us towards a unity with living things. In being logical or illogical, I would say, the absurd theatre is anti-rationalist. It negates entirely rationalism because it feels that rationalist thought, like language, only deals with the superficial aspects of things and life is a lot beyond rational ideas, thoughts and actions. Nonsense, on the other hand, opens up a glimpse of the infinite, opens up glimpse of reality, opens up glimpses of human life. It often intoxicating freedom brings one into contact with the essence of life and is a source of marvelous comedy, marvelous realism. No dramatic conflict in the absurd plays. Dramatic conflicts, clashes of personalities and power belong to a world where a rigid, accepted hierarchy of values forms a permanent establishment. Such conflicts, however, lose their meaning in a situation where the establishment and outward reality have become meaningless, have become nothing. However, frantically characters perform this only underlines the fact that nothing happens to change their existence, to change their presence of life. Absurd dramas are lyrically statements. Very much like music, they communicate an atmosphere, an experience of archetypical human situation. However, here language does not carry a lot of meaning. The absurd theatre is a theatre of situation, as against the more conventional theatre of sequential events. It presents a pattern of poetic images. In doing this, it uses visual elements, movement and lights more than the usual medium of communication, that is language and words. So, the historical background, as we understood, can again be divided into three categories: new meaning of existence, French existentialism, and Samuel Beckett, that will describe the idea and the philosophy of existentialism. So existentialism, the theatre of absurd, the main feature here we can find in this drama are absence of a real story or plot, no action since all actions are insignificant, vagueness about time, place and the characters. So all these ideas are not only describing on the theatre of absurd, but they are also discussing the presence of the philosophy of existentialism in the play. The value of language is reduced. In fact, what happens on the stage transcends and often contradicts the words spoken by the characters. Extensive use of pauses, silences, miming, and farcical situations which reflect a sense of anguish. Incoherent babbling makes up the dialogues which does not carry meaning. And the sense of man's alienation, the cruelty of human life, the absence or the futility of objectives, the meaninglessness of man's struggle, all these combine to make the major themes of the play as well of Theatre of Absurd. So, the main themes in Theatre of the Absurd in Waiting for Godot is basically rely on this very fact that relates it and makes it the most famous writing of the Theatre of Absurd is that it has no setting. A dissolute country road and a bare tree is the only setting objects that the drama has. Time is evening and characters are two tramps, Valentine and Estragon, bored by a day of nothingness, and they meet Pozzo and Lucky, and drama has only 2 acts. So, continuing with the philosophical background, we need to have a word about existentialism. Let me refresh your understanding about this very philosophy that deals with loss of the sense of external meaning, loss of belief in reason and faith, and believes in only that which we can see, which is visible, that which exists. Plato's essence and Spinoza's substance are out the philosophical window here. So the new meaning of existence are formed, awareness of man's personality to evil and conscious of the destructive power of scientific knowledge. The lack of moral assurance and the decline of religious faith, the disillusionment with both the liberal and social theories about economic and social progress, mistrust in the power of reason. This all relates to a sense of anguish, helplessness, and rootlessness developed especially among the young, and that makes the new meaning of existence in the modern era. And French existentialism saw men trapped in hostile world. Human life was meaningless, and this created a sense of confusion, despair, and emptiness. So, according to Jean-Paul Sartre, the universe was not rational and defied any explanation. He says that the main exponent of this philosophical idea was the very existence of human being in the modern era. And existentialists presented the absurdity of human condition by means of a lucid language and logical reasoning. These were the ideas of Jean-Paul Sartre. And existentialism states that there is therefore no pre-existence spiritual realm, no soul, no cosmic compassion for or interest in human life, no afterlife, no transcendence of worldly existence, no cosmic meta-narrative, no angels and devils, no divine will, no present destiny, no inevitable fate. This is the basic tenements of existentialism philosophy, the denial of reality. And the proponents of this philosophy believe that life has no present or external meaning of its own. Life is a mere reflection. They say that life is without human creation of it and meaningless. It relates to the myth of Sisyphus. Humans therefore are free. Free will is important. Free will is important is another philosophy related to existentialism. And their belief about truth and fact. Humanity's only chance at dignity lies in truth and fact. And what is the myth of Sisyphus? The courage to face the truth that we are alone in an uncaring universe. And for that he says, I can't go on, but I must go on, and I am going. The courage to face the possibility that life is meaningless and yet to still go on. And for that he says, the courage and dignity of Sisyphus when at the top of the hill he sees the rock roll back and realizes his meaninglessness and yet still goes down to set to work again. This explains the idea behind the philosophy of existentialism. So now the third aspect of philosophical background that relates to the theatre of absurd is the paradox of consciousness. And there are two possible interpretations of the existence of human consciousness according to this philosophy. One is a divine gift and other is a cosmic joke. A divine gift relates to fire of the gods, part of the divine plan. Consciousness brings us all our joy, love, art, etc. However, a cosmic joke defines consciousness was never intended for humans and brings us only suffering, pain, and the existence of evil. So, this was all about the philosophical background that had three dimensions: theatre of the absurd, existentialism, and the paradox of consciousness. Now, if we critically analyze Beckett's drama and Beckett's drama as whole and specifically his drama Waiting for Godot, we can see that there are few typical features that we can find in his writings: the plot, setting, theme, stage directions, and language. If you find the plot, you will find it obscure and non-consequential. There isn't any sequence, there aren't any standard measurements derived from Greek drama and the standard drama notions. As far as setting is concerned, you will find it symbolic and bare. Theme is meaningless of human experience. Stage directions are most of the time repetitive and quite frequent. Language is of everyday and meaningless, not adding much into the meaning that is being conveyed by all the other mediums possible for communication. So if we map the characters in the play, and if we analytically map and draw their sketch, we find Vladimir and Estragon are complementary characters for each other. Lucky and Pozzo are linked by a relationship of master and servant. Vladimir and Lucky represent the intellect, and however Estragon and Pozzo stand for the body. The two couples are mutually dependent, and the two tramps are waiting for Godot is biblical allusion in this name. Now let's have a quick word about all these characters. Estragon is one of the major characters who is one of the two protagonists. He is a bum and sleeps in a ditch where he is beaten each night. He has no memory beyond what is immediately said to him and relies on Vladimir to remember for him. Estragon is impatient and constantly wants to leave Vladimir, but is restrained from leaving by the fact that he needs Vladimir. It is Estragon's idea for the bums to pass their time by hanging themselves to commit suicide. Estragon has been compared to a body without an intellect, which therefore needs Vladimir to provide the intellect. As far as Vladimir's character is concerned, Vladimir is one of the two protagonists. He is a bum like Estragon, just like him, but retains a memory of most events, and that is how he is indispensable for Estragon. However, he is often unsure whether his memory is playing tricks on him or not, or whether he exists or not. Vladimir is friends with Estragon, because Estragon provides him with the chance to remember past events. Vladimir is one who makes Estragon wait with him for Mr. Godot's imminent arrival throughout the play. Vladimir has been compared to the intellect which provides for the body, represented by Estragon. So, the third character is of Lucky's character. Lucky is the slave of Pozzo. He is tied to Pozzo via a rope around his neck, and he carries Pozzo's bag. Lucky is only allowed to speak twice during the entire play, but his long monologue is filled with incomplete ideas. He is silenced only by the other characters who fight with him to take off his hat. Lucky appears as a mute in the second act. And fifth character is a boy. The boy is a servant of Mr. Godot. He plays an identical role in both acts by coming to inform Vladimir and Estragon that Mr. Godot will not be able to make it that night, but will surely come the next day. The boy never remembers having met Vladimir and Estragon before. So this memory loss is not an issue attached to the main characters in the story. This is an issue of the boy as well, who is not a major character. He has a brother who is mentioned but who never appears. Pozzo is the fourth important character. Pozzo is the master who rules over Lucky. He stops and talks to the two bums in order to have some company. In the second act, Pozzo is blind and requires their help. He, like Estragon, cannot remember people he has met. His transformation between the acts may represent the passage of time. So, this was our discussion based on the theatre of absurd, existentialism in paradox of consciousness, and we also discussed Waiting for Godot as a play, as a famous black comedy written by Beckett, Samuel Beckett. This was the third lesson of the series of revision that we have had in the course outline of modern drama, and in the following session, inshallah, we'll cover the last drama that is left for revision. However, for this drama, I would like to suggest you once again that this drama demands your attention, and since it's comparatively different drama from the other dramas that we have read so far in the modern drama, in a way that it deals with very serious issues of life, and the serious issues are then embedded a very serious format of theatre of absurd. So you may find at times that things are quite monotonous and they are difficult to understand, and you may find yourself stuck when you are reflecting on question. But if you go back and look at the lecture where I taught you how to form your reflections, how to talk about the ideas, the question can be any. You just cannot memorize answers to the question. What you need to do is you need to understand the concepts. Once the concepts are clear, once you really understand the text of the drama and you know each one of the characters in the drama, and you are well familiar, well informed about the story outline, then making your reflection in any of the questions should not be any problem to you. The only need is that you have to be thinking writer. A thinking writer means that whensoever you find a question to be answered, you need to think about all the important aspects asked in the question. Then what you need to do is, once you are clear about what has been asked, jot down your points, the main points that you would like to elaborate on in your answer. Once your main points are jotted down, try to categorize them so you avoid repetition. Categorize your answer, divide it into different main ideas, and then try to bring references from the text so to substantiate your understanding. Please don't forget that in literature, no answer can be a wrong answer unless your interpretation is well substantiated from the text. You have your own opinion, you have your own perception. Understanding of literature is different from learning mathematics. Here answer in mathematics 2 plus 2 is always 4, but in literature it can be 3.9 and it can be 5.1. So it based on your understanding, it is based on your perception. If you think that what you are saying is making sense, is making logic, and you can substantiate it from the text, from the reference, with the reference from the text, then you are all fine in your place. You just need to compose your answer. However, never forget to organize your answer. You may have thought, and in the beginning when we all think, our thoughts are not very clear. They are all the time not very organized. What we need to do it, we need to write down our thoughts, and we need to bring the clarity in it and the organization in it. Both of these aspects are basically interrelated. I was saying that clarity and organization, both of these aspects are interrelated. If you want to have clarity in your reflection, you need to embed organization in your answer. See what are the things that are to be said before, what are the things that should follow them. So you can, whatever you think, whatever you believe in, you present a case in a comprehensible manner to the reader. So the reader can read easily and can understand your frame of mind, and can then look at the idea what you are presenting. So you don't need to worry about any of the things at all. However, don't try to cram. Yes, you can memorize some of the quotes that you want to add into your writing, the references from the text. However, as far as a good reflection is concerned, a good answer is concerned, I would say it is all about your understanding of the ideas and understanding of the characters, very well knowing about the plot, setting, and all the aspects that we, if you remember, we discussed them in the very beginning, how to form your interpretations. So I wish you very best of luck, and I'm here with you for one more lecture, and will try my best to provide you an overall view of the last drama that we touched upon. This was all for today's talk. I will meet you in the last lecture, in lecture 32 now. Allah Hafiz.